the investigators since the last adjournment. It goes into some 150 pages. I haven't had time to analyze it and will not deal with it today. The discovery is in any event incomplete, but I will detail that by way of opening.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, so today we'll deal with what you are able to deal with.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine. But also there is the matter of Mr. Zwane's evidence.
Yes, if we could start with that, please.
Yes, let's start with that.
The legal representatives of Mr. Zwane have been provided with documentation. It's voluminous, and they require an opportunity to go through it. We will assist them to do so, or our investigators will assist them to do so. It's not necessary for every page to be examined in relation to Mr. Zwane. But I understand from the legal representatives that they would require at least a week to complete that process. For our part, the documentation that we have yet to obtain has not been examined. I would imagine we would need at least a week to go through it as well. And then this needs to be put to Mr. Zwane and his evidence completed, which would, I presume, take up to a day.
Well, during the week of, I think starting the 12th of October, I'm supposed to hear evidence relating to Transnet, but the legal team dealing with Transnet have informed me that they think that if they were to start on Wednesday of that week into the following week, that should be enough days for them. So that means we have Monday and Tuesday of that week available. So I was thinking that maybe we should adjourn the hearing of Mr. Zwane's evidence to Tuesday the 13th, which is the Tuesday of that week. Yes. 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 Okay. So you say the date is suitable, and you say you will manage to be ready by then. Okay. No. Thank you very much. Thank you for that cooperation. Mr. Pretorius, is that fine with you?
Yes, Chair. To lighten my learned friend's load, we will assist him in pointing him to relevant pages. Certainly not necessary for him to read 6,834 pages.
Yes, so the relevant ones will be identified, and
yes,
they won't be
in collaboration with him. If he wants to read them all, that's fine too, Chair.
Yeah, but the investigators will know exactly which pages are important.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's fine. The hearing of further evidence by Mr. Mosebenzi Zwane is therefore adjourned to Tuesday, the 13th of October at 10 o'clock.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yes, you are excused. Yes, please administer the oath again to Mr. Sodi.
Please state your full names for the record. Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath? Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience? Do you swear that the evidence will give will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
Thank you. Thank you for coming back, Mr. Sodi.
Thank you, Chair.
Proceed, Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. Before dealing with questions to Mr. Sodi,
We just confirmed that Mr. Sodi is legally represented, is that right? Or not really?
yes, his legal representatives are present.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Before dealing with the questions to Mr. Sodi, Chair, you will recall that both Mr. Zulu and Mr. Sodi, in affidavits before the Commission, raised concerns as to why they hadn't been asked for documentation. That was dealt with at the last hearing. Last hearings, in fact, both of Mr. Zulu and Mr. Sodi. Since the appearance, both of Mr. Zulu and Mr. Sodi, further questions arising out of their evidence have been put to them and requests for documentation made. That against the background of promises to provide information. We have received a reply from Mr. Zulu, which did not provide any documentation. In fact, he sent us off to the South African Revenue Services to get his income tax returns. And to say, to put it at its lowest, Chair, or its highest really, it's not a very helpful response to our request for information, despite his earlier protestations and promises. But no doubt that can be dealt with in the course of time in relation to Mr. Zulu. Mr. Sodi's response has been far more helpful, although the timing has not been entirely ideal for the legal team. We received 150 odd pages last night, which included some of the financial records of BlackHead and the tax returns of BlackHead. We still await on the promise in the correspondence the personal tax returns of Mr. Sodi. It would not be appropriate for me to deal with those today. They need careful scrutiny, and we'll deal with them, if necessary, in the course of time. But for the moment, we do have certain questions to put to Mr. Sodi, and by your leave, I'll proceed to do so.
Yes, you may proceed, Mr. Pretorius. Which of the files should I look at? There is FS1 and FS11, 1.1.
Well, Chair, it's really FS1 that we will get to, and FS8, but later.
Okay, all right.
So for the moment, I will just deal with the letter, which has been placed in the bundle, but the persons responsible for bundling have devised.
I've not had time to deal with it.
Well, they have,
Yeah.
but they have done it
In a certain way.
this very minute.
Oh,
And I quite frankly don't understand the bundling system that has been applied for it. And it's not necessary to do so. I'll just place on record what is necessary.
okay.
Mr. Sodi, on the 27th of August, a letter was addressed to your attorneys requesting certain documentation and information. You no doubt were aware of that. You have to say yes.
That's correct, Chair.
Your response was provided last night together with a bundle of documents. Your personal tax returns you've undertaken to submit in due course, saying they're not yet available, correct?
They are available, Chair. I think the point that we wanted to make here today was we've always wanted to cooperate with the Commission. We continue to do so. There is, however, a serious concern that we have which is, to put it frankly, quite disheartening, that there is very sensitive and private information that find its way to the journalists. And that is very concerning for us. We met with my legal team. We said, look, this information is there, but we need to appear before the chair and raise this concern that, to, for instance, leak private information such as the bank, details and the transactions, of an individual to the journalists, who then make all sorts of conclusions, cannot be right. And we said, we will come here and raise this matter and say, look, we are quite willing to provide this information, provided that we get some sort of assurance that it will not be leaked, or at least make it available for inspection to the commission. But we felt that we need to make this point, Chair, because that information that gets leaked, it's quite personal and very sensitive. You may have seen, Chair, I'm not sure, on Sunday, the newspapers publishing, information that is very private, which we certainly didn't provide to the journalists. I don't think the bank would have provided that information to the journalists. So if it's not us and my legal team, if it's not the bank, then who is it that is giving this information to the journalists, who then tend to make their own conclusions without us having been afforded the opportunity to deal with some of that information? It puts us at a great disadvantage because there are all sorts of perceptions that gets to be formulated, and tarnishing people's images as well. So we are cooperating. The information is there, but we just wanted to put that to the chair to see if something could be done about it, Chair. Yeah.
No, I hear you, Mr. Sodi. Any concern about information being leaked that should not be leaked is a legitimate concern. It's an old problem that we have had, that the Commission has had. You may or may not remember that in 2018, in the second half of the year, after the Commission had started hearing oral evidence, there were certain leaks to the media of affidavits that were had been provided to the Commission. I know that one such leak related to an affidavit by Mr. Agrizi. One of the people who complained about that was Ms. Nomvula Mokonyane. And indeed, maybe 2 months ago, an affidavit that had been provided to the Commission by Mr. Kutsi, the owner of, I think, Victoria Guest House, concerning Ms. Mukonyane's birthday party, which they hosted, was also leaked to the newspaper. The newspapers. I asked the investigation team of the Commission way back in 2018 when the leak started to investigate the leaks. And I think early last year, there were leaks as well. And there was an investigation that was done, and ultimately it could not find that anybody, it didn't find that anybody within the commission had leaked the information. They had, I think, looked at computers of various individuals, laptops. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they had even gone to, well, I don't know if they had looked at personal laptops of people, but that was the conclusion. There was a time when the leaks seems to have stopped for quite some time, but from time to time they happen. It's something very concerning, but I also do know that also leaks do happen in other institutions of matters that should not, find their way into the media. It seems quite difficult how to come up with a system which will make sure that no leak happens at all. My suggestion is that you and your legal team should talk to the Commission's legal team about the matter. The rules of the Commission permit a witness to identify information that is confidential, that they don't want to be made public. Your team and the Commission's legal team can talk about that to see what can be done to try and find a solution. So I might not be able to give you any guarantee, but all I'm saying is I hear your concern. I have the same concerns. Some investigations have been done. It doesn't look like it's possible to have a system that is provides a guarantee completely. But I'm saying that there was a time when the leaks seemed to have stopped, So I would just invite you and your legal team to look at what can be done, what application can be made that could assist in protecting information that is considered confidential. And then obviously the Commission's legal team will hear what your legal team has to say and take it from there. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, if I may add to that, the problem of leaked information and its publication with the cooperation of the media has been with us for some time. And it's a matter that, as you say, we've been alert to address as much as possible. But it seems that there are those instances with their own motives who would want to, in fact, breach the regulations of the Commission by disclosing information unlawfully. It seems that certain sections of the media continue to cooperate, and that's the first problem. We are dealing with it. This matter was brought to my attention this morning. The legal team will address it in cooperation with Mr. Sodi's legal representatives and deal with it. But I should add that the Commission is not the only entity investigating these and related matters, and so it is quite possible that the leak emanated from other instances. But in any event, we will look at it and seek to protect any confidential information. As you pointed out, and I've pointed out to Mr. Sodi's legal representatives, there are in our rules and in the regulations mechanisms to deal with these sorts of situations.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sodi, last night we got a bundle of documents of over 150 pages from your legal representatives. We were also addressed early this morning in regard to certain other information, and our cooperation was sought in relation to preserving confidentiality and avoiding leaks. We will undergo that process. I'm not going to ask you questions on the information that was given last night. I need time to go through it and understand it. But for the moment, I'd just like to summarize certain of the information given so that at least it's on record. Your personal tax returns, you say, are available.
Correct, Chair?
But you want some assurances about confidentiality.
Yeah.
We can talk about that. And of course, your legal representatives will advise you and they can take whatever steps they wish to. BlackHead Consulting's tax returns you've provided.
That's correct, Chair?
All right. You say the joint venture did not submit tax returns as each constituents member submitted tax returns individually.
That's correct, Chair?
Right. The audited financial statements of BlackHead Consulting Pty Limited you've also provided.
That's correct, Chair?
That makes up the bulk of the documentation that you have given to us.
That's correct, Chair?
The audited financial statements of the joint venture you say don't exist.
That's correct, Chair?
You were also asked for the instructions to perform work issued by the Gauteng Department of Human Settlements for the period January 2013 to August 2020. That deals with your work in Gauteng, and you've attached those.
That's correct, Chair?
You were also asked, in the evidence unearthed by the investigators, there were records of payments to Mr. Jimmy Tau, and you've said that he was not employed by BlackHead Consulting, correct?
That's correct, Chair?
Nor by yourself.
That's correct.
So there are no agreements between you and Mr. Jimmy Tau.
Well, he wasn't employed, Chair, in his personal capacity. There was a sub-consulting agreement between BlackHead and one of Mr. Tau's entities called El Jefe. So the contract was between the two entities, not in his personal capacity.
We've heard evidence from Mr. Moketse and from yourself, Mr. Sodi, about what has been called a joint investment in a property in Bloemfontein.
Correct.
That joint investment was apparently governed by an agreement between yourself and a trust formed by Mr. Moketse.
That's correct, Chair?
You were asked who drafted that agreement, and you say you can't recall, but you do think it was a collaborative effort between yourself and Mr. Moketse.
Chair, it definitely was. I mean, I thought long and hard about it, and I realized I got the template from the internet because I was thinking about who could have assisted. So I got a template from the internet and changed it to suit our needs. And I provided a copy to Mr. Moketse to make his comments and inputs onto the agreement, which he did. And we finalized it. But certainly there was never any legal person that was involved in drafting it. It was really a layman's agreement that was drafted by the two of us.
In relation to the drafting of the agreement, with the time of the drafting of the agreement, you say you can't recall, but it would be around the time it was executed, you said.
Precisely.
And you don't have the electronic device on which that contract was drafted.
No, I don't.
Nor can you recall where it was signed.
I can't recall exactly where it was signed.
Mr. Moketse says you
I'm sorry,
drafted
Mr.
the
Pretorius.
agreement.
How come you don't remember what electronic device was used to type it?
No. It was used, sorry, the device that was used is an old device which I'm no longer using. So it was on an old laptop,
Yes.
which I'm no longer using. I'm using a new
Yes.
laptop now. And I no longer have that old
Yes.
laptop. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
You might not be using it, but it being available, or you are not using it.
No, it's not available. It's no longer available.
It's no longer available.
Yeah.
Okay.
You were also asked to provide full details of your purchases of liquor at the TZ Lounge. That's the lounge related to Mr. Zulu. And you say you have no longer any documents in your possession and you can't recall precisely what liquor you purchased.
That's correct. Yeah.
I heard about the
Yeah, I
high-end
mean, I
whiskey,
looked for
etc.,
some of
but-
the receipts, but I can't find them. And I mean,
But you say you bought this liquor during 2015 and perhaps the early parts of 2016.
roundabout that sort of.
And
That's
you
the time.
don't have any records relating to the delivery to your premises.
No, I don't.
You will recall that the evidence was initially that the liquor was delivered to your premises. Later, we learnt that it was put in the boot of your car and taken to your KwaZulu-Natal residence by yourself.
Chair, the last time I was here, we dealt with that question, and I said that I collected a lot of this liquor and put it in the boot of my car on a number of occasions when I visited the lounge. And that testimony still remains, that I, put this in the boot of my car, as Mr. Pretorius is saying, to my residence.
In any event, Mr. Sodi, we will look at the documentation that you've provided, the answers that you've provided to our questions, and we will deal with them at some future date if that becomes necessary.
That's fine.
The investment in the Bloemfontein residential property, I've been asked by the investigators to ask you in turn whether you invested in any other residential properties in Bloemfontein.
I did, Chair. There's one property in the town of Parys, it's a small holding, that I invested in. Almost similar arrangement to the arrangement that I currently have with Mr. Mukesi. There are two of us in that transaction, and the understanding from day one has been that we're going to contribute equally for the purchase of the property. I paid my 50% of the property. I can provide records and evidence to that effect. My partner provided some funding, but he hasn't reached his full 50%. But that property is still there in Paris.
What is notable about the transaction between yourself and Mr. Mukesi is that there would be no evidence in the registry office of any link between yourself and the property. It went via a trust, correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And you say there are similar arrangements where you would have an interest in a property, but it would not be registered wholly or partially in your name.
No, I'm saying the property that I'm referring to in Paris, Chair, has not yet been registered in our names because it's not paid for as yet. So the arrangement was to pay bit by bit. As I said, I paid my 50% and my partner is still making efforts. I know at some stage he was out of employment and that sort of hindered his ability to be able to meet his obligations. But certainly, that's the only property, including the one that I invested in with Mr. Mkesi, where I went into partnerships. Other than that, all the other property investments that I'm involved in, it's just myself.
Are they registered in your name? Or are they registered in names of trusts?
Pretty much trust. There's maybe one or two that are registered in my name, but the bulk of the properties that I'm invested in are registered in the name of a trust.
If the investigators require or want to obtain information about properties in which you have an interest via a trust, you would be willing to provide that information?
No, that information can be made available even today. It's available, it's there, it's not, it won't take long.
I got the impression from Mr. Mosebenzi's evidence that you might be involved in the property business, maybe property development.
I am.
And that there may be numerous properties which you have. Is that right?
Chair, just thinking on top of my head,
yeah,
we could be talking in the region of maybe 20 or so properties.
Yes, yes.
Or even more.
Or even more.
Even more, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And based on what you just said a few minutes ago, the one in which you are involved with Mr. Mosebenzi and the one that you have just told me about, which is not registered in your name yet, are the only two where you went in with a partner or somebody.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yes, yes.
And I can certainly explain why the first one, the Paris one.
Yes, yes.
The intention behind the acquisition of that property, it's, as I said, it's a small farm. The intention was to get into farming. The partner that invited me into this venture has got some knowledge of farming. And he approached me and said, look, you know, wouldn't you want to diversify your business and look at farming? And I was keen. I looked at the investment. It wasn't a massive investment. And, you know, we agreed then that we'll acquire that farm in Paris, and we will then start buying livestock, which we did. I think one of the questions that was posed to me by the investigators was a transaction where I used cows as a reference. So that was, you know, evidence relating to what we were intending to do, or what we still intend to do with regard to that property in the Free State.
Well, maybe I should ask this question to you. I mentioned to Mr. Mosebenzi, it seems to me that based on the fact that you are involved, you are very involved in property development or in property business, which you do on your own. It seems to me, and also bearing in mind the terms of the agreement between yourself and Mr. Mosebenzi's trust, that you really didn't need him. If you needed property, you could go on your own and buy a property.
I could have gone on my own.
Yes.
But I explained here, Chair, that if one looks at the bulk of my property investment, is mostly in Gauteng and the Western Cape, which are areas that I know quite well. There's probably one property in Northwest, but there are certain areas that I'm not very familiar with, such as the Free State or Bloemfontein, to be specific. And when he approached me with this potential investment, I said, look, here is someone who lives in the area. He knows it better. And because I'm not very familiar with this area, I'm quite keen to go into an investment with him. And that's what happened, you know. For me, it was someone who's familiar because, as I said, when he approached me, he said, look, there's a new development that is coming up. It's got huge potential for growth. The returns, you know, in a number of years are likely to be very good. The upside will be very good. And I believed in him. And my gut feel told me that, you know, this person could be right. I did my own little research as well, and I was convinced that, you know, this could be a profitable investment opportunity for both of us. And I agreed to invest with him.
But of course, what you are telling me about relates to getting information or knowledge about whether buying property in a particular area would be a good investment. That's what you talk about. So you're saying the knowledge, his local knowledge, you thought was useful to you for that purpose. Is that right?
Precisely, because he lived in the area.
Yes.
And one, as an investor, always look at, you know, areas where you know there is likely to be good investment. You know, no one wants to invest in something which doesn't grow, which would not be able to give you better returns. Now, as I just said now, that that particular area I'm not familiar with. And certainly if someone comes along and say, listen, I know this area, I live here, I've got better information or better knowledge about the area, and my view is that if we do 1, 2, 3, we'll get better, you know, upside. You know, if my gut tells me it's the right way to go, and if I do my research and it says, you know, that's correct, then I'll go for it. And that's exactly what happened in this case.
Yes. Of course, you could get that knowledge or information, or even better information, from an estate agent, isn't it?
Of course you can.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Yeah, Mr. Pretorius.
At the time you entered into this arrangement with Mr. Mosebenzi, Mr. Sodi, you knew that he was looking for a property?
No, I didn't know that he was looking for a property, Chair.
You must
Mr.
have known,
Mosebenzi
Mr. Sodi.
came to me, approached me, and he said, and this was based on the discussions that we've had before, where he knew my background, you know, and you know, what I was doing. And he said, his words was that, wouldn't you want to invest in a property? There is a new development. It's about 2 or 3 years old. It's growing very fast. And, you know, you being a property investor, I thought I should present this opportunity. I'm looking at investing as well. And I'm looking for a partner that can invest with me. And I looked at it, as I said, and, you know, I was confident that this could be a potentially good investment.
So sorry.
And, you know, based on the growth in the past sort of 5 years since we invested in the property, he was correct, you know, and I'm quite happy with that investment. And I'm sure that in year 7, I'll be even more happier because our predictions are that, you know, it will be profitable for both of us. So to answer your question, Mr. Mosebenzi approached me as a potential investor. And the outcome of that was that, yes, I am willing to co-invest with you, and then let's do it. And that's exactly what happened.
Mr. Sodi, the question was, he was looking to invest in a property and looking for a property. You can't look to invest in a property without looking for a property. And that's capable of a yes or no answer. You knew that.
As I said, Chair, Mr. Mukesi approached me as a potential investor to invest with him in a property. And that's what happened. We had discussions, and ultimately we agreed to invest in a property.
Yes. Mr. Sodi, I'm not going to have a semantic argument with you because I want to ask another question.
That's fine.
Did you know that he couldn't raise the full purchase price of the property by way of bond?
See, that's a direct question, which I appreciate, Chair. Thank you for the direct question. I didn't know that he couldn't raise a bond of a particular amount. That information certainly wasn't provided to me. You know, I had it when he was here giving evidence that he couldn't raise bond because apparently he was blacklisted by SARS. I never had that information. All that he discussed with me was that, listen, there is a potential, you know, good opportunity from a property point of view. Are you willing to co-invest with me? And that's what happened.
Did you know he was going to live in the property?
At the time when we initially had this discussion, I didn't know that he was going to live in the property. We were talking about a potential, you know, rental income, but eventually we settled on him staying in the property. And I was comfortable with that because that was reduced in writing in terms of the agreement that we had, that certain things had to be in place. And just maybe to expand on that, Mr. Mukesi, I don't blame him because some of these things happened a few years ago. We actually agreed that instead of him paying rent, he must use those funds, which was about, I think at the time we're talking about 6,000 to 7,000 rands per month, or somewhere around there. We agreed that he must use that as a top-up of the bond repayment. Okay, instead of paying rent, let him use that as a top-up so that we reduce the repayment period of the bond. That was an agreement that we had. But like I said, you know, perhaps he doesn't recall that, that conversation. And I can't blame him because this happened, as I said, a few years ago. But that's certainly the agreement that we had with him. And you know, over and above that, the agreement was that he will, because he will be staying in the property, he must be responsible for other costs, such as security, such as, you know, insurance costs, rates and levies and so forth. So in actual fact, I think it was a bit more onerous on him to make sure that all those things are in place. You know, and that aspect dealt with the rental issue, and I was quite happy that he can reside in the property, as long as he pays that amount that we agreed on.
For completeness' sake, Mr. Sodi, the agreement does say that the trust shall raise a balance of 1 million rand required to purchase the property, and BlackHead shall contribute 650,000 rand to the acquisition of the property. Correct?
That's correct, yeah.
That's the property he lived in, correct?
That's the property in question, Kusai. Yeah.
Clearly, the whole agreement was to his benefit, as well as to your benefit as an investment.
I wouldn't say it was to his benefit, Chair. It was a transaction that we both went into, and there were obligations from both parties in terms of what needed to happen, what the responsibility of each party was supposed to be.
Mr. Sodi, why would one enter into a profitable investment other than to benefit from it? You yourself said it was a profitable prospect, and the intention must have been to benefit from it.
I think he admitted, I think Mr. Sodi did say it was to Mr. Muteki's benefit. I think he accepted that it was to his benefit as well, but that's what he said. Is that correct?
I said the whole idea for entering into that investment
Yes.
was so that ultimately, when we dispose of the property, or later on, that we realize our investment, our return on investment. Otherwise, Chair, it would have been futile to get into an arrangement like that, because first and foremost, it was premised on that, that it is an investment, and one naturally expects that when you invest, you expect to get an upside, which is exactly what is happening in this case.
Correct. And that investment required the participation of yourself and himself. You've described that.
That's correct. Represented, if I may add, Chair, by the trust.
The involvement with Mr. Zulu and TZ Lounge, do you know who owns TZ Lounge, and who owned it at the time, 2015, 2016?
Chair, Mr. Zulu mentioned that he has a lounge, that he owns a lounge, and that's what I know. As to who owned it before, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't have that information, but I knew him to be the owner of the lounge. Yeah.
So you say that you understood Mr. Zulu to be the owner of the lounge at the time you repaid the debt to him.
That's correct.
Of course, if he was not the owner of the lounge, the debt would have been repaid to someone other than the owner of the lounge.
That's correct, Chair.
The investigators, Mr. Sodi, have done some research, and that is summarized in the pages of the investigators' report. It would also be summarized in the documentation you have given us. But without going into exact detail, it seems that BlackHead had a turnover, at least during 2015, of over R1 billion. Does that accord with your recollection?
And that could be correct, Chair.
And in 2014, it also had a turnover of over R1 billion.
That's possibly correct, Chair.
They've also established that BlackHead received payments from the Department of Human Settlements, or the Departments of Human Settlements, in excess of R1 billion over the 10-year period, over a 10-year period, up to 2019. Correct?
That's possibly correct. I think maybe to expand on that, a lot of the work that we do is related to human settlements. And
Relates to?
human settlements.
Human settlements.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's unsurprising that, you'd find that the bulk of the work that we do, or, the income rather, or revenue generated comes from Department of Human Settlements.
Would you look at FS1, please, page 404?
Did you say 404, Mr. Pretorius? Did you say 404?
I'm sorry, Chair. If you would bear with me a moment. What happened this morning
Yeah.
was because of the introduction of the 150-odd pages, certain sections of FS1 had to be moved into a new file, FS 1.1.
Yeah.
So if I may refer to FS 1.1.
Okay.
Do you have FS 1.1 there, Mr. Sodi?
I do.
If you could go to page 404.
Okay.
I don't have 404 on FS1. Or is this FS11?
Yes, Chair.
1.1. Okay, I've got it. That is FS 1.1. Okay,
You say in paragraph 48, Mr. Sodi, from time to time I have made donations to the ANC. Because I'm a proud member of the ANC, I will continue to support the ANC. That is a correct statement of fact, is it?
It is a correct statement, Chair. Maybe I must just qualify that I'm not a card-carrying member of the ANC, but I support the ANC.
Then in paragraph 17 and 18 of your further affidavit, which appears at FS 1.1505, you make similar statements.
Which page are we at?
505, further along in the bundle.
Correct?
Paragraph 17, you say in the third line, I donate substantial amounts to the ANC. And in paragraph 18, you say, as I will set out in more detail below, 2014 was a particularly successful year for BlackHead, and I recall having made substantial contributions to the ANC's election campaign. Those are both correct statements of fact.
Correct, Chair.
If you would look, please, at FS8, page 53. There has been an analysis of BlackHead's bank statements and a number of payments marked ANC, and for the period March 2013 to March 2019, amongst others, the following payments have been made in the following amounts. And I want to refer you to that table on page FS8, page 53. Who is Bongani More.
He's a business associate of mine.
Was he not the Deputy Director General, Gauteng Department of Human Settlements and COCTA?
He was at some stage. According to my recollection, he resigned about somewhere around 2014.
Why would you pay him 7.5 million rand?
As I said, Chair, he's my business associate. When he left government, we agreed on getting into business together, and he was very clear. In fact, when we spoke, he said, look, I want to get into the private sector. I want nothing to do with government. So whatever opportunities that we look at must be in the private sector. And that's exactly what we did. So our first opportunity was an investment in call it a hotel development in Cape Town, where we acquired about, I think it was about 20%, through an entity where we had other partners. And that was followed by an acquisition of a stake in another private opportunity, which in this case was Melrose Arch. That opportunity was funded by the PIC, and we're still involved in it.
I can cut that short for you, Mr. Sodi. Are you saying these payments were made to him when he was no longer in government?
The bulk of this, as far as I'm concerned, and I need to say, Chair, that you know, I need to thoroughly go through some of this, you know, and look at the dates on which some of these payments were made, because I never got to, you know, because of the restriction of time, never got to analyze some of these dates and so forth. But I am confirming that Mr. More is currently a business partner of mine. We not, together with him, not doing any business with government. It's all private sector. Yeah.
All right. Well, perhaps we will ask you to assist us in that regard, Mr. Sodi.
No problem.
And follow up at a later date.
No problem.
Who is Colin Pitso?
He's someone that I got to know very well. Met him a number of years ago, and he introduced me to his dad, who's also in the construction industry. And that introduction led to myself and you know, his dad, through an entity called KP Construction, getting involved in some of the construction projects.
I'm told by our investigation team that Colin Pitso is Nombola Mokonyani's chief of staff.
That's not correct. He was at some stage Nombola Mokonyani's chief of staff, but that is not the case anymore.
When were these payments made, do you know?
Again, sir, this was a number of years ago, but I would need to, again, go through my bank records carefully and check the date so that I provide you, Chair, with the accurate answers.
Why would you pay him 6.5 million rand?
I have, Chair, just explained that the payment was not to him. I used his name as a reference. The payment was to KP Construction, which is an entity that is owned by his father, that I did business with. So that payment relates to KP Construction, not him as an individual.
There is also a payment
Well, I'm sorry, just that one. Do you mean that the payment was not made into his account, to his personal account, but into some entity's account, but you used his name as a reference?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
I obviously knew him better than Kepi, and I just used that as a reference. His name is.
Chair, this is information given to me by the investigators. Before taxing the witness, Mr. Sodi, in regard to the detail of these payments, my own view is it's necessary to do some further research.
Yes. Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah. No,
we are just going to
yeah. Yeah, I think
waste time.
let that
basically.
be done first. Yeah.
Because my information is that the payment was made to Colin Pitzer. If that's not correct, as Mr. Sodi points out, I shouldn't be putting it to him.
Yes, yeah, I think let there be
But
further investigation.
let me just ask a few more questions and then put a proposition
Yeah.
to Mr. Sodi. The payment reflected here is a payment to Diane stroke Anoj Singh. What would that be about?
Chair, again, I've got absolutely no idea as I'm sitting here.
Yes.
It's a payment of 10,000 rands.
But as I understand it, Mr. Sodi, you would be willing to sit down with the investigators, go through these
Yeah,
payments.
absolutely. You know,
deal
I
with it.
don't, Chair, want to sit here and start
Yes.
giving speculated
Yeah.
answers. You know,
No,
I would
that's
want
fair
to
enough.
provide you.
Yeah.
The payment to Mokoena Nosizwe Zuma, do you know anything about that? 1 million rand?
Yeah, this is a friend of mine. You know, but then again, you know, I can't remember why I paid him this amount, but he's a friend of mine.
He's a sports personality, apparently, Mr. Mokoena.
He is correct, yeah.
Linda and Kobo,
This is against a friend of mine.
also someone involved in the administration in Gauteng Housing and Copter.
Used to be, but not anymore.
Why would the payment of 2 million be made? Do you know?
This payment was made as a loan to Linda. After she left, she was struggling.
So this is a loan to a previous
It's a loan
official
to
in a housing
well,
department in Gauteng.
who's currently a friend, and we exploring as well. We exploring business opportunities together.
All right. There are payments made in respect of ANC T-shirts, volunteers, etc. Would that amount of 3.5 million rand have been paid to the ANC at the time of the elections, 2014?
Some of it, Chair, was payments made directly to the ruling party. Some of it would have been service providers. For instance, that in this case, I'm making an assumption that some of that payment went to service providers or companies that were printing T-shirts that were distributed to, to volunteers and so forth.
Yes. To the payment of 371,553 rand to Paul Mashatile, what is that about?
That's a payment that was made directly to the ANC.
For what reason?
From time to time, Chair, we get requests to assist, with donations, and that happens. It could be, for instance, to pay maybe for a venue for the Lekgotla. It could be, to assist with payment for salaries, but that happens on a regular basis, and different people would approach me and ask to help, and where I'm able to assist, then I assist.
So members of the ANC, for example, would know that you're in supporter of the ANC would know you're a successful businessman and would approach you for donation?
A lot of times, yes, that's, what would happen. Ask for donations, and I assist wherever that I can.
Pinky Kekana, who is she? Do you know?
She's someone that I consider a sister, that I'm close with. She's currently in government as of last year, I think, with the new administration.
Yes, she's a deputy minister, as
She's
I
a deputy
understand.
minister, yeah.
You go over the page. Well, no, you don't have to go over the page, I do. Mr. Nkesi?
He's a minister in the current administration, and he's unfortunately one of those that was mentioned in the newspaper articles that I referred to, and I spoke to him yesterday to check if he was given an opportunity to respond. He said, no, no one called me, but, there was mention of me and an amount of 45,000 that I received. And he said, had anyone taken the trouble of calling to say, Mr. Nkesi, we see you received a particular amount, can you explain? He would have given them the proof of payments. There were two payments, one of 15,000, which was directly paid to a school of a child, underprivileged child, and that I paid, coming from his request. The second payment was 30,000, which was for accommodation, also for underprivileged kids, which was paid to an institution. So those are the two payments, totaling 45,000. But the impression, unfortunately, gets created, with the media, that there is a current sitting minister who received some money.
Well, let me just...
So that's what the payment was for.
So they've been explained. You've had an opportunity to explain them now.
I'm explaining after the fact, which is unfortunate, Chair. I'm explaining after the information was widely publicized.
After the publication of the
Exactly.
article.
Yes.
Well, let me just place on record, I should have done it earlier, that very often when the Commission is about to lead evidence, suddenly we find that that evidence appears in the newspaper prior to us leading the evidence, not as a result of any leak from the Commission, but from other sources who clearly might have mischief in mind. But we will check our sources anyway in that regard.
Yeah.
But I don't want to debate that with you. It's a
Correct.
matter which we must investigate.
Yeah.
The payment Tulas Nkesi we've dealt with. Zizi Kodwa.
Zizi is a friend that I've known for a number of years, and I've made payments to him in his personal capacity before he joined government, when he still worked for the ANC. And that can be verified. He's currently the Deputy Minister of Intelligence, I think. But it was payment that I made to him as a friend, where he requested for assistance on a number of times. And a lot of it, Chair, was related to, for instance, he will say, we've not been paid on time this month from Luthuli House, or there's delays in payment. I mean, it's still happening even now. And he would ask for some assistance because maybe he's got some debit orders that have to go through, and there'll be maybe a payment of 20K there, 30K there, 50K. That's what happened. And the accumulated amount, I think, comes to about 174. But those are the payments that I made to a friend.
And the final payment?
That final payment, again, it went directly to the ANC account. And that particular individual there was the Treasurer General of the ANC at the time.
Well, we don't need to, we should be consistent. That is Mr. Mkhize. You say it was paid to him in his capacity as Treasurer General of the ANC.
It was paid to the ANC at the time that he was the Treasurer General. And he would have been the one that would have approached me at the time to ask for assistance. And that's why his name is used as a reference.
And that was just about 6.5 million.
Yeah, that's...
I understand from your statement, and we can go to the detail if necessary, but I'd like to put the question to you as a general question, that often when you do business, you obtain a contract, or you used to obtain a contract, and ensure through the appointment of subcontractors the execution of the contract. In other words, often you didn't do the work yourself, but as a manager and as a supervisor, you would ensure the execution of the contract with your own expertise. Do I understand it correctly, that that was a way of doing business?
Well, Chair, I don't think it's entirely correct to say that we didn't do most of the work. Most of the projects, let me not say any, but most of the projects that we were appointed on, we did most of the work. There are instances where you require a specialist. And if you don't have that sort of knowledge or skill in-house, you would then subcontract a specialist. To give you a case in point, and I don't want to open a can of worms again, Chair, with the whole asbestos thing, is that you would do the work, for instance, the auditing and the assessment and so forth. But when it came to the actual handling, because we're not specialists, you would then get a specialist to handle that part. And then you will charge a project management fee. But you'd find that in most cases, project management fee is about 20%. As a general rule of thumb, it's about 20%. The bulk of the payment would go towards the specialist. When, for instance, I started my business, that is BlackHead Consulting, it started as a project management company. And then it grew. Then we appointed engineers, we appointed civil engineers, we appointed structural engineers, we appointed environmentalists, so that we then get to do the bulk of the work ourselves. But certainly when we started, we would subcontract a lot of these skills and maybe retain the 20%, but the 80% of that would then be paid out to specialists. So, again, if you, Mr. Pretorius here spoke about the turnover for BlackHead in 2014 and 2015. And someone could be sitting there and say, wow, this guy's actually making a lot of money. But if we go deeper, then you realize that a lot of that, anywhere between 70 and 80%, was paid to specialists. And then we retained the project management fee. But over the years, we grew and we obviously, added some of the core, specialists within the company, so that we, as I said, we tend to do a little bit more than just being a project management company. So typically, that's how the industry operates. And as I said, that's a rule of thumb, the project management fee of 20% and the bulk of it going to specialists. To give you another example, if you, Chair, there are a lot of, for instance, construction buildings. You see a lot of them as you're driving. And you'd realize that pretty much maybe 9 out of 10 of those buildings, there's always a board which tells you that so-and-so is the construction manager. So-and-so is the electrical engineer. This one is a quantity surveyor. This one is a health and safety expert, and so forth and so forth. You hardly find, and I've never seen it, a situation where, for instance, one building, one company has got all the different specialists, and they're doing everything themselves. I've certainly never found it. I've never seen it. I mean, even with a normal house, you would appoint a builder, but you would find that someone who's doing plumbing, it's a different company because they specialize in plumbing. Someone who's putting up the staircases, it's a different company because they specialize in putting staircases. Someone who's doing electrical is not the builder, but it's a different company which is specializing in electrical. You know, so, but you have one point of contact, and that point of contact is the builder. And when you pay, you don't pay 10 or 11 different subcontractors. You pay one builder, one person, who then will deduct their project management fees and pay this other specialist. So that's typically how the industry works, and it's not different in our case as well. Chair, I hope I clarified.
Yes.
So I don't want, again, people think this guy has made $1 billion. No, it's never like that. The bulk of it is paid to the specialists. It's never sitting with us.
Mr. Pretorius?
You described the manner in which BlackHead did business at FS 1509. Would you go there, please?
Which paragraph?
FS1 or FS 1.1, Mr.
It's
Pretorius?
FS 1.1. I'm
Okay.
sorry, Chair.
Okay.
We can go through the detail if you like, but I understand this to be consistent with my earlier question to you, Mr. Sodi, that a budget would be developed by the relevant department. You would ensure that the project was completed on time within the budget, and you would have as your profit the difference between the budget as agreed and the cost of executing the project by BlackHead Consulting CC. And you say in paragraph 40, by virtue of the foregoing, BlackHead Consulting CC contracted with the department in question, and it in turn subcontracted the various third parties referred to above. That's what I was putting to you.
Okay.
That was a practice, it seems.
And this is, Chair, certainly referring to right at the beginning, before the company grew to what it is today, when it was still, a CC. And
Just
we
by
were-
way of summary, so it may be necessary to come back to as we go through the detail of the information you've now given us and our own investigators, researchers into the finances. But it seems that for the asbestos contract at least, Mr. Mpambani was able to unlock opportunities to obtain a high-value contract. Correct.
Okay, so, Chair, going back to that unlocking opportunities, as I had
Your
said
words.
previously, that he was instrumental in making sure that we get appointed, that his role was to, engage with the relevant officials, as he had said, take the proposal and submit it and so forth. That was his role. With regard to the high value contract, I had explained here before that the ultimate fee that we eventually settled on with the department was to a large extent based on the fee that we got in Gauteng. There was a realization that because the Free State is geographically
Mr. Sodi,
different.
I don't want to interrupt you unnecessarily, but your answer, I'm really not looking to deal with the amount that is made. That's a matter of record already. It doesn't bear repeating.
Yeah, so I suppose what I'm trying to deal with is your statement that Mr. Mpambani's role was to unlock the project
And
for
you
a high
said
value.
it happened.
For a high value project. So I was dealing with the high value.
I did say high value, but
Yeah.
we know that evidence. We've dealt with it exhaustively over days.
Okay.
Okay, but I can't stop you answering. I'm
No,
just
no, no, no.
suggesting politely
Yeah, okay,
that we
that's
needn't
fine.
go
I mean, if we are on the same page,
Yes.
then I'm happy. I just don't want to make assumptions that I understand what Mr. Pretorius
Well,
is
we're not
saying.
going to submit, I can assure you, anything that is not based on evidence already given.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine, that's fine.
But what is a feature of the asbestos contract, which is repeated, certainly in the Free State, in the building contract and in the Stina arrangements and contracts, is that these contracts were entered into having avoided or having not followed proper competitive bidding processes. It seems that the failure to follow a proper competitive bidding process in the asbestos contract is not an isolated example, certainly in the Free State. It happened more than once. It's a pattern.
You inviting my comment?
Yeah.
Chair, I certainly cannot speak for the Estina project nor the housing project, but I can certainly speak for the asbestos project. And I've said it previously when I was here, that my understanding, which is still my understanding even now, was that there is a provision from Treasury, Regulation 16A.6, that was utilized in our case to get appointed by the Department of Human Settlements. It's been used before. We were certainly not the first company to be appointed using that provision. So it's there, and I think we've acknowledged, here that it is a provision. It's made, it's there. We can rely on it. So with regard to whether that was followed properly, in terms of making sure that all the checks and balances are complied with, all the boxes are ticked, that I wouldn't have known, because you would agree with me, Chair, that would have been the responsibility of the supply chain officials. So I certainly wouldn't have, I don't have knowledge about what needs to be checked or what needs to be in place. As far as I'm concerned, we complied with whatever that we need to comply with. And that's my comment, Chair,
Yes,
with
well,
regard to that.
The first point, Mr. Sodi, is that it's common cause and not disputed by anybody, including yourself, that there was no competitive bidding process that preceded your appointment in the Free State.
Correct.
Whether the processes actually used were A, genuine, and B, lawful is a question that we've examined exhaustively, and we're in a position to make our submissions to the chair on that. It's a legal matter that I don't think would be fair to tax you.
Correct, yeah.
But what also seems to be part of the pattern is that money goes back to officials either in joint deals or in other forms, and the ruling party benefits from these deals, as it did from all the work that you did. Now, whether there's a link or not is a matter for further investigation in this case, but it may be a matter that the chair would want to comment on in due course.
Okay.
That the very community from which the work comes in this form benefits from the profits made. What do you say about that?
I really don't have much of a comment there, Chair.
But it is a
Suffice
matter,
to say that I have stated, even in my affidavit, that I grew up supporting the ruling party. It's really the only party that that I knew growing up and that I continue to know. I'm not saying I don't know the other parties, but it's the party that I believe in. I also believe that a lot of the opportunities that we have as young, especially black people, were opportunities that were created by the ruling party to a large extent. I voted in the 1994 elections because all of us were quite excited that for the first time we have an opportunity to vote for whoever that we want as our leader. And we did so. It was a moment of great joy and victory, you know, when the results were announced. I continued subsequent years during elections to vote for the ANC and to support wherever possible. And the requests sometimes when they come, the request may come and say, listen, we owe a service provider, for instance, 300,000. They catered for a function at one of our conferences. Are you able to assist? I may say, well, I can assist, but I've only got, for instance, 50,000, or I've got 100,000. That continues to happen even now, Chair. And I, because I grew up in the movement, and a lot of the people that some of them are now in leadership positions, people that I've known for many, many years. So the fact that there would have been some donation from either myself in my individual capacity or from one of my entities, I don't see that as strange or as fraudulent or as corrupt. I certainly don't see it that way. And, you know, unless someone convinced me otherwise. But I don't think there is any crime in one supporting a party of his choice. The fact that a lot of the work that I get is from government, I find that a bit overreaching to create the link between my donations to the agency and the work that we get. I think it's a bit overreaching, to put it bluntly.
well, lest I be accused, Mr. Sodi, which I may well be, of generalizing prematurely. What I'm putting to you that is that there are indications, at this stage at least, in the asbestos story, which may be replicated in other business dealings between private individuals and government, that indicate benefit to the ruling party that has, as you say, created the opportunities that you've talked about. Indications at this stage, perhaps in time the bigger picture will be put together, but I just wanted your views on that. Thank you. Chair, those are the questions. A further investigation will take place. Whether that will require further evidence or not is yet another question. It's not certain that it will, but that's a decision that I won't make.
Yes. Okay. And there is no further witness
Chair.
in the afternoon.
The further witness, that's
Yeah.
the matter that's been postponed.
Yeah.
That would not have finished today anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I should put a few questions to Mr. Sodi before we adjourn, so that
Sure.
when we adjourn for the day. Mr. Sodi, going back to the arrangement between yourself and Mr. Mosebenzi or his family trust, it looks like it was a once-off partnership. Once-off in the sense that there was no intention of continuing and getting other properties that the two of you would be involved in jointly. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other property that you told me about, where you are going into partnership with somebody else, you said that one has not been registered in your name.
As far as
yet.
I know,
Yes.
it hasn't. Yeah.
But I take it there is some agreement that has been concluded between you, the two of you.
There is, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember when that agreement was concluded? More or less?
Again, Chair, I think it would have been around 2014, maybe, somewhere around there.
2014.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, it's been quite a long time.
Yeah. No, it's been a long time.
Around, that was the same year.
Yeah.
Was this 2015 with Mr. Mosebenzi?
Say that again, Chair?
The one with Mr. Mosebenzi, was it 2014 or 2015?
No, that was 2015.
2015.
Yeah.
So
Hence,
you
I said that. So that one would have been prior, and I would have discussed it with Mr. Mosebenzi maybe during one of our lunch meetings. That is why I mentioned that when he came to me with this proposition, he was aware that I was looking at acquiring a property in Paris. So that one would have been prior, but I can look at the dates. It's not but it should have been prior to that one.
Okay, and you can make finish a copy of the agreement
Yeah,
to the
certainly.
investigators. Okay.
Certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you say to my proposition that for all intents and purposes, looks like you did not need Mr. Mosebenzi. He needed you. You could have invested in another property. It would just have been one of the properties. He's the person who really needed you.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to use the word need, but
Well,
he
he has told me that he wanted to buy a property where he would live, and he could not raise a bond of more than 1 million rand because ABSA picked up some judgment, and therefore he needed somebody to assist him to get a property that would be more than 1 million rand, and you were that person. So he certainly needed you.
Chair, it may appear so, but certainly when he approached me in 2015, as I stated just a little while ago, that information he never disclosed to me, that he was looking at acquiring a property of a certain amount, but the banks could only give him a loan of R1 million. That information was certainly never discussed with me. All that he said to me, and I just don't want to waste everyone's time, but I'll repeat it. He said, I'm aware that you're looking at acquiring a property in the Free State. I have come across a potential investment opportunity. Would you be keen to invest with me? Those were his words. Would you be keen to invest with me? And I said, so I asked him a number of questions about this potential area that he was referring to, and he told me what where it was and so forth. I did my own research, as I said, and I said, look, I'm quite happy that we can, invest together. He then said, look, I'm able to raise R1 million from the banks. Are you able to raise the balance? I said, of course, I am able to raise the balance, and that's what happened. But the information that he gave you, Chair, about the judgments and SARS, that was news to me. In fact, when I heard it, I never knew that information.
When he approached you, had he already identified the property, and did he know how much, what the price would be for the property?
Well, the question that I asked him was, what is, the first question I said, but what's the average, price for the properties in that area? He said it's between 1.5 and 1.8 million. So we're looking at somewhere more or less around there. So it wasn't a specific number. That is the initial, discussion that we had. And I said, okay, that's fine. I mean, if it's around there, you say that you are able to raise R1 million. I'm able to raise 650,000 rand. So it means we need to look at a property that will fall within that price bracket. And that's what happened. He went ahead and.
Did you raise the question of why he wanted you as a partner for this property?
Well,
why you in particular?
Yeah, I just assumed because I had told him that I like playing in the property space, speculating. I assumed that based on that, that's why he felt confident that he can approach me with this proposition. My feeling was that had I not disclosed that to him, he may have gone to someone else. But he certainly came to me because he knew that I was certainly playing in that space. I've got a property development company, apart from just investing in property, which builds houses from scratch. We acquire a piece of land and we develop. We've got a number of those developments in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg. So he certainly knew, that it's something that I like doing.
Did the question arise between the two of you when you had this discussion, whether it was appropriate or it would be appropriate for you and him or his trust to get into this arrangement in circumstances where your company had just done part of the job that it was given, but was still going to do another part, and understand payments were still being made?
It did, sir. It did. I actually
raised it.
I raised it.
Yes.
And I raised that issue, and I said, look, we've completed our exercise. We completed what we were appointed to do. At that time, Mr. Mpamane told me that forget about phase 2. It's not going to happen. That's what he told me, that, the information that he got was that there was no budget, there was no money to go into phase 2. So it's not going to happen. So certainly at that point in time, when I had this conversation with Mr. Mokesi, I had that at the back of my mind that we're not going to go into phase 2 of the project. We had completed and phase 1, and that was it. We had been paid some of the money that was due to us, but there were certainly more payments that were still outstanding. And you know, so I didn't see anything wrong entering into this transaction. But of course, later on, when now questions are being asked, and I look back and I'm saying, you know, maybe it wasn't quite a smart, you know, decision for us to do that, you know, because then it raises questions of, it becomes questionable. Someone looks at it, but these guys have just completed a project in your department. Yes, it's completed, but there's still outstanding monies that are due to them. So certainly, if one applied his mind to that properly, I probably would have said, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea. But now I've got the benefit of looking back in hindsight and say, it may raise those, you know, it may look questionable. You know, to someone looking at it might say, but hold on, man, this is questionable. And I admit that it may look questionable, but certainly it was never the intention to, yeah.
Well, that your company would not be involved in, now I don't know whether you said, he said your company would not be involved in phase 2, or whether he simply said there would be no phase 2. What exactly did he say?
No, this is Mr. Mpambani, the late Mr. Mpambani. So he said to me, look, he's got it on good authority. I've always believed what he told me coming from the Free State, because he was, he was quite entrenched there. He said, look, there is no possibility at all from what he, at least in the near future, because the department don't have money to go into phase 2. And I accepted that, you know, and I had no reason not to believe him, because you know, everything else that he told me about the Free State turned out to be true. Well, at least most of the things that he mentioned. So at that point in time, like I said, I had no reason not to believe him. So I believed him, and I thought, you know, there would be nothing untoward.
So the conversation that you were telling me about 5 minutes ago, where you were saying you raised the issue of whether it was appropriate, understood you to be saying that conversation you had with Mr. Moketsi, is that correct?
That's the conversation that I had with Mr. Moketsi.
Mr. Moketsi, yeah. And I thought you were saying he was the one who told you that there would be phase 2.
No, he wasn't the one.
He was not the one?
No.
Okay.
No, yeah.
That it was Mr. Mpambani?
It was Mr. Mpambani who first gave me that information.
Yes. Was that prior to this discussion with Mr.
It was prior
Moketsi?
to the discussion with Mr. Moketsi.
Okay. So when you raised the issue with Mr. Moketsi, namely, you know, we have just done work for your department, is this appropriate? What was his response?
No, the response from both of us was that, look, there doesn't seem to be a problem. It doesn't appear at that point in time that this will be a problem, because we had already completed what we were appointed to do, as I said, which was phase 1 of the project. And I then mentioned...
But you had been appointed to do both. You remember?
Yes.
Not one.
Yeah. But remember also, Chair, that the actual appointment for phase 1 came in the form of an IPW. We never received an IPW for phase 2 of the project. It was part of the submission that we made in our unsolicited bid. That certainly was part of that. And also in the SLA.
Service level agreement?
Yes. Also, the service level agreement alluded to that.
And the appointment letter? if I remember correctly.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
you could be right, yeah. But we also we understood that to give effect to that appointment, an IPW had to be issued, which was not the case. It never happened. So then we left it there. We certainly never pursued it to say,
But
we were
obviously,
appointed for.
it would happen when you reach a stage where you were about to start phase 2. It didn't have to be given to you long before you could start phase 2. In other words, the mere fact that it was not given doesn't mean it was never going to be given if a stage was reached where you were about to start phase 2.
So, Chair, to answer, this is how I looked at it. The treasury regulation was invoked in this case for our appointment to do phase 1, which is the audit and assessment. We certainly didn't do phase 2 in Gauteng. So there is no way that, and I'm sure we would have gotten to that stage. We said, guys, you can't just go ahead and use the same regulation because the regulation talks about if you are appointed elsewhere by any organ of state for a similar job. We were not appointed to do phase 2. And therefore, it would have been inappropriate for that regulation to be utilized for phase 2. So my view at that point in time was that if phase 2 had to proceed, there would have to be a competitive bidding process for that to happen. I certainly wouldn't have allowed it because I knew that, this would become a problem later on because that regulation talks about, if you have been appointed to do a similar kind of work. But this, obviously, it was later on after we had already submitted our proposal and the SLAs were signed and stuff like that. And at that point in time, I was like, you know what, if we go into phase 2, it's going to be a problem. So I'm glad it never went to that. We never got into that stage.
But how do you say that, Mr. Sodi, in circumstances where you, that is your company or the joint venture, were the people who went to the department and said you would like to be given a job that involved both parts?
Yes.
You knew that in Gauteng,
Yeah.
you had not done
Yes.
the asbestos removal.
Yes.
And you knew that it was the treasury regulation that was going to be used.
Yes. As I said, Chair.
So it doesn't seem to me you can say what you are saying, to say you were going to object to being given the job for the removal because that would not be covered by the treasury regulation. But
As
I'm
I-
saying,
yeah.
but you are the one who approached the department
Yes.
and said you wanted to do, among others,
Yeah.
a job on the basis of a treasury regulation that had not been a job you had not done before, that on your own evidence would
Yeah.
not apply.
That's correct, Chair. Hence, I'm saying that realization was much later after we had already approached them and submitted our unsolicited proposal. When I started looking at it, and when I had a discussion with Mr. Mpabani, when he said to me that there's not going to be phase 2, I remember that I said to him that it's actually a blessing in disguise, that this phase is not going to go through because we didn't do phase 2 in Gauteng. So it's actually good for us that it stops here and not proceed. But it was after the fact. As I said, it was way after the fact, after the unsolicited proposals were submitted and the SLAs were done. And then one started looking at it and said, but here it's a gray area that I wouldn't want us to get into because otherwise it could become problematic.
But you were so keen, at least at the beginning, Mr. Sodi, to do this part, both parts, that
Yes.
you even said you had the capacity, you had the qualifications, you have the experience or the accreditation when actually you didn't have. Is that right? You said last time that, yes, your company did not have that.
Yeah, as
qualification,
I tried qualifying the chair by saying
Yes.
that we would approach those kind of appointments from a project management point of view, and then get a specialist to come and do the work, which is it's an industry practice. That's what we had envisaged. That should it get there, we would have to just be a project manager and get a specialist to do it. But as I've just said, Chair, that had I applied my mind right at the beginning, when we submitted the proposal, we certainly wouldn't have included phase 2. We wouldn't have, because, like I said, I got to know and understand some of the intricacies of regulation much later on. I mean, I didn't have much, knowledge about it. But I got to know as, and even now, I mean, I'm still trying to familiarize myself with how it works and so forth.
Yes. Last time, I think you considered, I think quite correctly, that to the extent that in your unsolicited proposal or in the service level agreement, to the extent that you said that you could do this part of asbestos removal and so on, or that to the extent that you said you had the qualifications or the accreditation, you accepted that that was a misrepresentation. Am I right?
I think I need to make that very clear,
Yes,
Chair,
yes, yes.
just so that we are on the same
Yeah,
page.
yeah. No, I don't want to attribute to you something that you didn't say.
So I said that to conduct an audit or assessment, you don't need accreditation.
That's the first part.
That's the first part.
Yeah.
And I said that to do phase 2,
Yeah.
which is the handling and the disposal,
Yeah.
you need to be accredited.
Yes, that's the part I'm talking about.
Yes, and I made it clear that we were not accredited. We still aren't accredited to handle asbestos. This is the part I'm referring to, that we would have had to get a specialist, someone who is accredited, to execute that. But we play a management role. Okay? But the specialist would do the bulk of the work, and then we play the management role. And this is the point that I just want to submit to you, Chair. If I didn't make it clear the first time around, I just want to make it clear to you now that, you could be appointed, even though you don't have the qualification, but you play the role of a project manager.
You see, I don't have a problem at a certain level.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem if you are looking for a job
Yeah.
that you want to do or business, and the job may entail something that you can't do.
Yes.
If you disclose to the person who must give you the business
Yeah.
that this is what you can do,
Yeah.
this is what you can't do, but you are going to need to bring in people who have got the expertise, the skills, so that the person who must give you a job knows that you actually can't do this, you are not
Yeah.
accredited to do this,
Yeah.
but here is your plan.
Yeah.
And they are happy with your plan, you see.
Yeah.
But the difficulty with what you are saying when you seek to qualify, what I think you said last time, is that you didn't disclose that in the correspondence and in the service level agreement with the
Yeah.
department.
Yeah.
You actually said you had the qualification or accreditation, and I thought to the extent that last time you may have considered, I thought that was a correct concession to say we shouldn't have said that.
Yeah. Look, Chair, I mean, in an ideal world, in this industry, that, for me, it's how it should happen. When you say, Mr. Sodi, for instance, here is a plan. I want you to build me this house. Okay? Tell me how much you're going to charge me to build this house. And I go and I do my number crunching, and I come back to you and say, Mr. Chair, this house will cost you 5 million rand. Okay? Hardly does it ever happen that I will say, well, I'm not qualified in doing electrical work, so I'm going to get Mr. Joseph. I don't do plumbing. I'm not qualified in doing plumbing. I'm going to get Mr. X. It doesn't happen in the industry. So I'll come back to you because I would have had, at that point in time, I would have taken out sections where I don't have the necessary knowledge or skill or know-how. I would have taken those sections and went to the specialist and say, listen, how much would you charge me to do 1, 2, 3? And then they'll say, Mr. Sodi, we'll charge you 10 rands or 20 rands. And then I put my 10% markup. I come to you, now it's no longer 20 rands, it's 22 rands because I've put in my markup, okay? But I certainly don't disclose to you that, I'm going to get so and so. It becomes my responsibility as the one point of entry and one point of exit to manage those subcontractors.
So, Mr. Sodi, are you saying to me it is right, as far as you are concerned, for somebody who doesn't have the qualifications to do a particular job or accreditation to go around seeking a job to do, seeking business to do that kind of work, for which he has no accreditation, is not qualified, not to disclose that he doesn't have the papers, he doesn't have the accreditation or qualifications, as long as he is going to go and look for somebody who has got qualifications? Is that what you are saying?
I'm not saying it's right, Chair.
Yes.
That's why I said in an ideal world,
Yes.
One wishes the industry, or it could work like that. So that if one is given a task, then upfront, then you tell the client that in this area, it's not my specialist. I'm going to subcontract. I don't have the necessary qualification in this area. But because we play a project management role, it becomes our responsibility. So if anything wrong, if I build a house and tomorrow it starts leaking, or it catches fire because of electrical fault, I'm not going to go to the electrician, nor the plumber. I'm going to go to the person that I appointed and say, it is your responsibility. As to who did that, it's none of my business. But you were given the contract to do 1, 2, 3. So I'm saying that it's the industry. That's how it happens.
But now, you tell me, based on what BlackHead said to the department, in regard to this, we have repeated that. You said we can do, we have the capacity, experience, qualifications, or accreditation, I can't remember all the adjectives, to do this job. And when you said that, you included asbestos removal, and you didn't say you were going to get somebody who was going to do it. You accept that it was wrong not to disclose that.
I just need to add, Chair, that we certainly didn't mention that we've got the accreditation.
Yes.
And we made an admission that we can certainly do the phase 1.
Yeah, phase 1, I'm not having an issue with it. It's phase 2.
So it could be that our submission should have gone further, and I'll admit that it could have gone further to say that if you appoint us for phase 2, which is the actual removal and disposal and so forth, it could have gone further to say, if you do that, then we will have to appoint a specialist to do that actual work. It could have gone further. to allude to that fact, Chair.
Was
But it certainly
right
didn't.
or was it wrong?
Come again?
Was it right or was it wrong for BlackHead not to disclose that it itself did not have the qualification or accreditation to do the second phase, but to represent that it could do it?
Because, Chair, I don't want
So,
just to...
I want you to come out.
Yeah.
I thought last time you
did that,
came
yes.
out and said,
I
"We
did
should
make
have
that
done
cons- yes.
And I thought that was...
No, it's fine. I made that concession, but it's also important for me to explain how the industry works. Whilst at the
No,
same
you have
time,
explained that. I
yes,
understand
whilst
that,
at the
yeah.
same time considering that yes, it would be an ideal thing to do. It would be a proper thing to do. To say, guys, yes, this particular aspect we don't have the necessary expertise or skill. We're gonna have to subcontract that. It would be so. I admit that.
You accept it.
No,
was
I
not
accept
proper.
that. Yeah, but I just wanted to, first of all, just say this is how it happens in the industry.
Yeah.
So that we are on the same page when it comes to that.
Okay.
But also admit that that's why I use the word in an ideal world.
Yes.
That maybe this is how things could happen.
Now, Mr. Mosebenzi said yesterday, when I asked him the question whether the department would have given you the job if they knew that, at least if he knew that you didn't have the qualifications or accreditation to do the second part of asbestos removal, he said definitely they would not have given you the job. Do you want to comment on that?
I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that, Chair, on the basis that he could have said, we only appointing you for phase one. But to categorically say that, I wouldn't have appointed them, on what basis? Because, what experience and what accreditation would because you, as I said, you don't need that in phase one. So you could have said, guys, I've got your unsolicited proposal in front of me. It talks about phase one and phase two. As you all know, phase two requires some accreditation. Phase one doesn't. So I'm going to appoint you for phase one only, because that's what you did in Gauteng. So I'm only appointing you for phase one, forget about phase two. That's in my view, that's how you should have responded to that question. To say that I would only have appointed them for phase one, but not phase two. But
Of course, a question that arises if you seek to, if as a department, you have need for somebody to do a job that has got phase one and phase two, is whether you'll appoint somebody who is able to do both parts, or whether you will appoint somebody who can do phase one and can't do phase two, and then you must appoint somebody else for phase two. And you don't know whether, if you appoint somebody else, when they come, they might say, whoever did phase one didn't do a good job, we have to start afresh. Then you might have to pay more. What do you say to that?
Well, say my comment to that, it's very simple. If you look at the project, what needed to be done was to quantify the number of houses that are roofed with asbestos and come with an estimate in the form of a generic BOQ as to what needs to happen or how much it's going to cost. That's what needs to happen. So, and whoever then comes afterwards is someone who will say, okay, fine, we know that in Township A, there are 300 houses that are roofed with asbestos. And these are the areas that we must go to. All right? And then they simply go there and they do what they have to do based on the information they would have received from phase one. So it's really quantifying and giving information about what needs to happen. In this case, we were only talking about the removal of roofs and nothing else. I know that, your expert, when they were here, they spoke about pipes and gutters and so forth. But in this case, it was just restricted to the actual roofs. So it wouldn't have looked at anything else beyond that. So really it's putting the horse in front and the cart, behind the horse. To say, but also for the department, remember, it's quite useful information because they need to know when they're doing their budgeting. What are we budgeting for, and how much do we need as a budget? Because otherwise, you then plan in the dark without having the necessary information. But if you do know, then you say, okay, fine, we need X amount, or this is what has been found, so let's put X amount available, and then you deal with it. So it assists the department as well in that sense. Yeah.
Now, the price that was agreed upon,
Yeah.
I understood you last time to say that was the price for the whole job, namely the whole job being as set out in the service level agreement and the letter of appointment, which would be phase 1 and phase 2. Did I misunderstand you?
Is the chair referring to the 850 rands?
Yes, yes.
No, certainly not, Chair. I think you probably misunderstood. The 850 rands will in no way even touch the surface when it comes to roof removals. That was strictly for the audit and assessment. So if I did not, make myself clear, I apologize, sir. But to give you a rough estimate, to remove a roof, and go dispose of asbestos and put a new roof, tiled roof, which is what's happening in most cases. It will cost you anywhere in the region of between, I'm estimating between 20 maybe and 30,000 per house. If we're talking about the 40 square meter houses that we're referring to, but 850 certainly would be scratching the surface.
Lastly, in that agreement, going back to your arrangement with Mr. Mokhetsi or his family trust,
Yeah.
there's a clause in that agreement that said the agreement should be kept confidential or something to that effect. Why did you want that agreement to be kept confidential?
Again, like I said, this was, a template that we got from the internet, and just, for me, it was an agreement between the two parties. And one would, and I'm certainly not a legal person, but the interpretation of that was that it's an agreement between BlackHead and the trust, and should remain that way. But of course, if the relevant, authorities, whoever wants to have a look at it, they can have a look at it. But like I said, I think the lesson learned there is that some of these things, leave them to professionals to draft them instead of going to the internet and thinking that we can be smart and draft these kind of things. But it certainly didn't, for me, it was neither here nor there. It didn't mean anything. Yeah.
Okay. Anything arising, Mr. Pretorius?
Mr. Sodi, on the 28th of May 2014, you delivered, on behalf of the joint venture, to Mr. Mokhetsi, an unsolicited proposal.
Correct.
In that proposal, you say, we have pleasure in submitting our request to be appointed on a risk basis for the following. First bullet, assessment / audit of houses roofed using asbestos material. Second bullet, handling and disposal of asbestos sheets to an approved designated disposal site. The objective of the project on page 166 of FS8 is twofold: quantify the number of houses roofed with asbestos sheets, and second bullet, remove and dispose asbestos to an approved and accredited disposal site. In short, it was your unsolicited proposal that you would also remove asbestos.
As I said, and I'm qualifying it, Chair, to say that we would have played a project management role on phase 2. There is no way we would have touched asbestos. Because we knew, I certainly knew, that you can't touch asbestos unless you are accredited. But you can do the audit. You
Yes,
can do
but
the
you-
assessment, it's fine.
You also knew, Mr. Sodi, that you hadn't done it in Gauteng, yet you bid for it in Free State.
Correct. And I said, Chair, that if one had applied his mind properly when we did this unsolicited bid, we wouldn't have included that aspect. I've already stated that before you, Chair, to say that much later on when I started looking at it, I'm like, it was actually a blessing in disguise that it never got to that stage, because I started analyzing it and looking at it and say, this will be a gray area, it will be problematic. So I admit that, it shouldn't have been there.
Just one more matter, if I may, Chair. In your affidavit, FS 1.1399, you say that in relation to Mr. Jimmy Tao, you paid him an amount of 3 million rand from the proceeds of the asbestos audit in the Free State, but this payment related to unrelated projects in which Mr. Tao rendered services and was paid from BlackHead's account after receipt of its share from the JV. Question is, did Mr. Tao, in his personal or any other capacity, perform services for you or BlackHead?
As I said, Chair, we engaged Mr. Tao through one of his entities as a business development consultant.
So okay, that's sufficient for present purposes. It's not necessarily going into detail for the present. The Chair may want to know. But in the questions that the investigators put to you, the answers to which we received last night, one of the questions was, please provide further any agreement between Mr. Jimmy Tao and or any of his related entities and Mr. Sodi's and any of his entities. And you say no further agreement exists.
I think answering that question, my understanding was the question is saying, is there an employment contract between BlackHead and Mr. Tao? That's
any
why
agreement.
we said, it could be a mis. That's why we said further on, Chair, that we had already provided the agreement entered into between BlackHead Consulting and his entity. So it could be you know.
Right. Well, we may have to go back there and clarify the question and perhaps obtain a full answer.
Yeah, that's fine. But we've certainly made it very clear that he wasn't employed in his personal capacity. So, when I read that, I thought it's talking about him being employed in his personal capacity. And it could be a matter of language, which I admit could be misunderstood.
Thank you, Chair.
Just one last question that I forgot. I asked you about the conversation that you and Mr. Mosebenzi had about whether it was appropriate to enter into this arrangement. And you said, if I recall correctly, well, you said you knew by then from Mr. Mbambani that there was going to be no phase 2 because he said the department said it didn't have money. But I'm not sure that I remember whether you did tell me what Mr. Mosebenzi's position was.
No, his position also was the same. He said definitely there's not going to be any phase 2 for the foreseeable future.
Yes, in that meeting where you were having the
Yeah,
discussion.
he said that was it. Suppose that the lot of questions that have been asked, there's a lot of noise, the Auditor General and so forth. So certainly, this is it. It's not going to go further than what we
That's
had already
quite
done.
interesting because I asked him this question yesterday. Initially, he said his response was that there was going to be no phase 2 or BlackHead wasn't going to do for phase 2. I'm not sure which one of those. But later on, he changed that. And he said because this was simply a commercial transaction, he didn't think that there was a problem with the two of you entering into this transaction.
Yeah.
And I asked you specifically the question, this issue that you mentioned earlier, that there was to be no phase two, that's not what persuaded you. He said, no, that didn't play a role. What played a role was that, as far as I'm concerned, this was simply a commercial transaction, and I could enter into it. At least that's how I understood him to be saying. And I said to him, but it can't be a convincing answer, because it would mean everybody, every official, they can get into these commercial transactions as long as it's a commercial transaction, whereas actually the very purpose of raising issues is because officials are not supposed to be entering into commercial transactions with service providers and so on.
I watched that.
You watched that, yeah.
I did, and
yeah.
I'm not sure why, you know.
What do you say about his evidence in that regard?
No, I don't. Like I said, I certainly can't speak on his behalf. I can't speak for him.
Yes,
but
yes.
I wasn't sure why he didn't come forthright and say that a decision was made that there wasn't going to be phase two, and therefore he didn't see anything wrong.
So your recollection is that, with regard to both of you, the reason why you felt comfortable to enter into this transaction was because your understanding and his understanding was that there would be no phase two.
Chair, if I knew that phase two was going to follow, there is no way I would have entered into that transaction with him. I wouldn't have done it. Because that clearly would have just been problematic. Anyone looking at it would have said, this is problematic. And the only thing that gave me comfort, as I said, was because we had completed the project. But someone can say, but yeah, you have completed the project, but you are still getting paid,
payments,
which, as I said, when one looks at it now, it might appear to be questionable, but at that point in time, certainly, I didn't think it was going to be a problem. But certainly, to answer your question, Chair, if I knew that phase two was going to proceed, there is no way I wouldn't have done it. Absolutely not.
Because it would be wrong.
Because it would be wrong. It would be, and for me, it would be inappropriate. Because again, you could say, well, you did this because you're trying to influence an official to make a decision favorable to you. And I wouldn't have wanted to put myself in that situation where there could be a perception created. There could be a perception created that by doing this, as much as it was a legitimate and above board commercial transaction, but it could have, in my view, by doing that, it should have created a wrong perception, I think. Yeah.
Of course, am I right to understand that whatever may have been discussed between yourself and Mr. Mbambani about whether there would be phase two or not, and between yourself and Mr. Mosebenzi about whether there would be phase two, am I correct to understand that there was nothing official or in writing that the department had sent to BlackHead or to the joint venture to say there will be no phase two, despite the fact that our service level agreement with you contemplates that there will be phase two?
Yeah, there was absolutely nothing official, Chair.
Yes.
And like I said, if there was anything that had to be done from the department's point of view to proceed with phase two, would have been the issuing of an IPW. But at that point in time, there was no communication, nothing official. As I said, I had no reason to doubt what Mr. Mbambani was telling me, because in most cases, whatever that he told me turned out to be true. And when I certainly raised it and I said, look, this is the information that I got, he agreed with it. He said, yeah, definitely, there's not going to be a phase two.
So you would agree, would you not, that as at the date of entering into that arrangement with Mr. Mosebenzi, anybody looking at correspondence between BlackHead or the joint venture and the department and looking at the service level agreement, all they would see would be there is still an agreement between the department and the joint venture in terms of which they will be phase 2.
Chair, certainly someone
Yes.
without intimate knowledge of what
Yeah.
was going on would have arrived,
Yeah.
I suppose, at a conclusion like that.
So the agreement, the service level agreement had not been terminated in any official way. Is that right? Because
At
that agreement said you do 2 phases, you remember?
Yeah.
So it had not been terminated and phase 2 had not been done. Therefore, the position officially was there is still a job for you to do. But you are saying that unofficially you had been told that there would be no phase 2. Is that right?
That's what I'm saying, sir. But I'm also saying that, to give effect to the SLA, and I think that's what the SLA say if we read it carefully. It does say that you will proceed to do work after having received an IPW.
Yeah.
So, in other words, in the absence of the IPW, you can't do anything. Nothing will happen as much as the SLA is there. So, so that was an instrument to determine whether or not, one proceeds or not.
Okay.
Chair, if I may ask just one
Okay.
perhaps series of questions. At the time you entered into the agreement and arrangement with Mr. Mosebenzi regarding the joint investment in the residence in Bloemfontein, you say the work had been finished, had been completed,
Correct.
In
but
regard
you
to
had
phase
not yet
With regard to phase
received
one.
full payment.
We had not yet received the full payment.
And the question as to whether you would receive payment was a matter that was in the hands of Mr. Mosebenzi. He gave that evidence.
Well,
Well, let me give you the evidence completely so that we don't continue for another hour. I don't mean that to reflect on anyone, but the complexity of the issues involved. Let me put it to you fully. The Auditor General had already declared the contract invalid or irregular. Mr. Mosebenzi had to decide whether you should continue to receive payment, and it was in his discretion, after he said an investigation that was conducted by himself, that he would then have decided to continue the payments. And these payments continued through the same period that you were entering the agreement with him. Were you aware of that?
Chair, I was not aware about the AG findings. That's one. 2, I'm aware that the matter was taken to court by one political party in the Free State. And the outcome of that, in my view, is what influenced the decision that was made by the judge in that matter is what then influenced the department to make our final payment. That's my understanding. It could be wrong, but I certainly, like I said, didn't know about the AG findings. And when the matter was taken to court and it came out in our favor, that's why I thought, it was on that basis that the payments were made to us.
But Mr. Sodi, the simple point being put to you is that at the time you entered into the agreement with Mr. Mosebenzi, BlackHead had not yet been paid in full, and payments continued thereafter.
Well, I mean, Chair, it's a fact that we've discussed here. The fact of the matter is there was a contract of a certain amount between the department and the service provider. It was made very clear in terms of how the payments were going to be done. And also that once upon successful completion of the project, the full payment will be done. So certainly from our side, we provided a service. We completed it. And so we dealt with one side of the agreement, which was doing the work and completing it and submitting the reports to the department. Certainly no one from the department raised an issue about the work that we did. They were happy with what was submitted to them. And what was therefore left was for them to honor their side of the agreement. So in my view, it wasn't necessarily up to Mr. Mukesi to decide whether he wants to pay us or not. We had a contract. That was there. That was very specific. That service provider, you will do 1, 2, 3, and upon completion of that, you will get paid X amount. So even if, for instance, Mr. Mukesi left or resigned, whatever, whoever then came into that position, or whoever was going to come into that position, would have had to honor the contract. So it's not, there's certainly no influence at all that we could have tried to exert on Mr. Mukesi to pay us. He was obliged to pay in terms of the contract that we signed with the department.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sodi, for coming to give evidence and assist the Commission. You may be asked to come back. You might not be asked, I'm not sure. It will depend on the further investigation and documents.
Okay.
But thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
I will now release you. You are excused.
Thank you.
I take it that there was no plan to do any re-examination.
Thank you, Chair. No, not at this stage. I assume once we're done with the investigation that's still outstanding, then we would
Yes.
be in a position to make a final decision.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll adjourn now for the day. Tomorrow there will be no sitting, but there will be a sitting on Thursday. I think I'll hear the evidence of the Premier of Northwest, as well as Ms. Memela in the aviation work stream. We adjourn.